What's up, Relentless students? Dakota here, coming at you with week 2 of our Gods of War series. So last week we talked about this idea of a bunch of different gods, right, that we create based on things that we enjoy, and how a lot of times those end up becoming what we put on the throne of our heart, right? We talked about this idea that our heart or our mind, what we desire is a throne room. It has one throne that somebody can sit on, and God wants to be the one that's on the throne. And in fact, we're commanded in the Bible to have no other gods before him, which means no other gods in his presence. The idea is that we would move out or move everything out of the throne, right? Of the throne room. So that way God can be on the throne, and him alone as the only true God is who is our desire, right? And then from there, we see that as humans we are tempted constantly to follow after and to worship these other gods, to serve these other gods, to give time, money, resources, and so on. And so we talked about how we're going to go through different gods. And we're going to talk about the different ones that battle for our heart. So what are these gods of war? So this week, so to break it down, over the next few weeks, the way we're going to go at it is we're going to talk about these gods as, we're going to talk about these gods in different temples, right? So like the same way how the Romans, Greeks, and so on, they had their temples, they worship their gods. We're going to look at these gods as if they're in a specific temple, and each week have a different temple. So this week we're in the Temple of Pleasure. Go ahead and get your laughs out now if you need to, whatever. We're in the Temple of Pleasure. And we're going to be talking about 3 gods that we find in the Temple of Pleasure that a lot of us fall prey to because, well, they're enticing. So the first one is the god of food. How many of you eat? Cool, so all of you have the ability to be tempted by food. Food is good, and it's meant to be good, right? It's meant to be good from the beginning. There was food in the garden for the Adam and Eve before they fell, and then there is food today. The biggest thing is that God wants us to eat. He wants us to be sustained. He wants us to gain life from that food, right? But there's a degree that we turn it into a god. We turn it into a god when we allow our preferences to blind what we're doing, right? For example, if you're buying the more expensive stuff and you're spending more money on it. For example, when you start binging, right? When you can't eat enough and you eat your emotions. When you start dieting or cutting out food, right? To control, I control food, right? And it's in an unhealthy demeanor just because you want to look better. Not because you need to get healthier, not because you're overweight, not because anything, but because your body image matters, right? We allow food to become this god. And so one of the ways we do that is honestly the way food is marketed to us. It's enticing, right? We hear, it's soothing for our soul, this idea of soul food, or we talk about comfort food, right? Food equals comfort. How many of you, when you've gone through a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, turn to a carton of ice cream? Yeah, I've done that, okay? Guilty. All right, ate the whole thing, but let's be real, it doesn't take a breakup to get me to eat a whole carton of ice cream. But with that, guys, right, so we turn food into this god where it is what controls us. It's what drives us, right? We are literally serving it. We have to eat so much food. We have to consume, or we have to see how long we can go without food. And you're one of those people that tests themselves. How many meals can I skip before I just have to eat like crazy? And the issue is that we forget that God is what's going to bring us comfort. He's what's going to give us refuge. He is not there He is there in order to fulfill our needs, to sustain us, and to give us life. And so, though He is not physical food, He provides the physical food. The issue is that we abuse it, right? And that's where it becomes the God. And so, the Bible actually talks about this more often than not. And it talks about how God would give the people food, the people would ask for more, and you would see the greed that was coming, or the binging that they wanted to partake in, things of that nature, right? The comfort they were finding in the food versus in God. And one of the biggest examples of this is when Jesus feeds the 5,000. We've all heard this story, right? Jesus was preaching, and he was preaching in this big gathering of people, and he's like, oh no, what are we going to do for food for these people? There's so many people, and no food. And so he takes a few pieces of bread and a few fish, and he breaks them up, and suddenly there's enough food to feed the 5,000. Oh, did I mention the Bible says 5,000 men? So that doesn't include women and children. So at that point, you're looking at a crowd that's probably somewhere between 10,000 and up to 20,000 people. And he fed them all. The next day he goes out early in the morning on a boat, right? And he goes out into the middle of the lake. And when the people wake and find him there, they go, Jesus, what's going on? Like, where are you going? When are you going to feed us? And they were expecting him to give them food again. And it goes back and forth a little bit. And then Jesus in John 6, verse 35 says this. It says, then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. And whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. He's like, guys, look, I know that you want me to feed you right now in this moment. That's what you want. You don't need it this moment. Allow me to sustain you. You will be fed. You will be provided for. You will not go hungry. You'll not go thirsty. Just wait for me to provide. And people are like, but I want food now. So you're not going to feed me now? And Jesus is like, no, I'm not going to feed you right now. You don't need food right now. And people are like, all right, deuces. Right? It's like they were driven by food. They weren't there for Jesus. They weren't there for his teachings. They weren't there because he is the Messiah. They were there because the dude gave them food. Cool. Not cool. So, right, God knows that we're drawn by food. He knows the issue. And as he said there, he will sustain us. He is meant to be a replacement for that food. He will provide the food when we need it. But until then, we lean on him. And some of the ways we can pick up on it, if this is the God you serve, is we can do things like take a fast, right? Maybe you got to cut out desserts for a week and see what happens. Whew, that'd be a tough one. Or maybe you got to cut out Starbucks coffee for a little bit because you just have to have that Starbucks. Maybe it's making sure you're actually eating just the 3 meals a day and not trying to excessively or undereat. Skipping meals or eating extra meals, whatever it is that you struggle with, right? We have to drop the food and instead pick up God and allow him to provide the food as we need it. That doesn't mean that he won't give us things that taste good. It doesn't mean that you can't occasionally get Starbucks. That doesn't mean that you can't have cake or ice cream. It doesn't mean that, it honestly doesn't mean any of that. But what happens is we have to just still turn to God in moments for comfort, for refuge, and allow food to be pleasurable because God made it so, not just because food is, right? So that's the God of food. The next God that we find in the temple of pleasure is the God of sex. Get your laughter out. Yep, ha ha ha. He said sex. Oh man, I'm going to say it a lot more times, okay? So first off, sex is good. Okay, just like food is good, sex is good. Except sex is only good when it's done the way God intended it. God intended sex to be this intimate, spiritually intimate thing between a husband and wife, right? It is this piece of marriage. It is meant to be what brings spiritual intimacy in marriage. It's the idea of the whole, in Genesis, the two become one piece, right? It's sex is good. Sex feels good. Sex is pleasurable, right? But it's made that way when you are doing it properly in that spiritual intimacy piece, right? So what happens, I'm going to get a little sciencey with you guys here. So when you have sex, there are different things that are happening in your brain that are chemicals, right? And it's what actually creates the happiness and the pleasure that is surrounding the sexual act. Okay, there's dopamine and serotonin and all these other things that are coming into play. When you have sex the way that God intended, all those chemicals balance in the way they're meant to, and it actually brings more intimacy between you and your partner, as well as can actually alleviate stress and reduce anxiety, bring happiness, things like that. When you have sex the way the world says is okay, when you have sex the way that sin has twisted it to be okay, that's where it's broken. And when we're talking about this, I'm not necessarily even saying you're having actual sex. Maybe your struggle is that you just keep thinking about sex. Every time you walk past a girl or guy that you think is cute, you go, I wonder, and you allow your mind to go. Maybe your struggle is porn. Maybe you have an issue where you don't have safeguards on your internet. Your parents don't really watch what you're doing, and you can get away with whatever on your phone or your computer. And you're looking at these things. You're looking at images or videos or whatever it is. Maybe for you, you've got a boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're like, well, she's on birth control. He wears a condom. It's fine. But the point is, right, so whatever it is, we worship this God of sex in some way, shape, and form. If this is your God. Again, some of us don't struggle with this, some of us food, and we'll talk about more gods. But we twisted it. We've twisted God's plan for sex. And instead it becomes this God. And specifically, sex becomes a God when we turn it into lust. Sex is supposed to be about love. It's supposed to bring about this spiritual intimacy between a husband and a wife. But when we turn it into this thing about lust, instead what we're saying is, oh, I don't need a partner for this. I'm pleasing myself, right? Pornography, we're not committing to anything. We don't have to give anything. We just we receive. If you're struggling, if you're having sex with a boyfriend or girlfriend outside of marriage, what are you actually, depending on where you are in that, what are you receiving or what are you actually giving? Like where do you have the spiritual intimacy piece? Because I would be willing to bet a lot of money that's not happening. And so instead you're getting the high and you're falling right back down. There's nothing to actually sustain it. If it's the lustful thoughts and you just keep thinking about, what is that doing for you? All it's doing is pleasing you. There's no actual commitment piece to it, just like with porn, right? And that's not how God intended it to be. And so what happens is we go through the cycles with this, and it starts to build up to something that is going to be catastrophic. There's going to be this consequence. Whether it's, okay, well, you lied to your parents about what you're doing on your phone or your computer. You lied to your parents about where you're going with your boyfriend or girlfriend so you can do what you want to do. Or you're lying to yourself about where you're going in your thoughts with the girls or guys that pass you by. Whatever it is for you, you're allowing it somehow. You're lying either to yourself or to someone. Outside of that, with pornography, those people, there are people in there that are being like human trafficked and things like that, and they are literally being forced to do these things. When you're dealing with the actual boyfriend girlfriend and having sex in that manner, what are you doing to them? You know that outside of not having sex, every other preventative method, there's a chance to have a baby. Just making sure you know that. When you're thinking these lustful thoughts, what is that doing to your relationships with those people? Can you look at them and not think about wanting to have sex with them? Can you look at them as just a human with actual clothing and be able to be present in the conversation? Or is your mind going and then you have to go, oh, yeah, I was paying attention, and eyes are up here? You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? There are always bigger consequences. Whereas when sex is partaken in the proper way, it's fulfilling, it's sustaining, and it's meant to be good. But instead, when we're not doing it properly, instead of feeling pleasurable and actually feeling satisfied at the end, we feel empty and unsatisfied. We feel like we need more. And so what happens is the first time, you get this little bit of a high, and then you drop back down. And then you get this little bit of a high, and maybe you don't even go as high as the first time. And then you go farther down. And then maybe you get one that actually brings you real high. And then you're going to go face down to the ground, and you're going to be looking for that next high. It's just like a drug because of what it does in your brain, right? And God didn't intend it to be that way. God intended it to be something that brought you up and kept you there. Because that's what that's what it does when you're actually practicing in marriage with a spiritual intimacy piece, right? And so with this is one where there's actually 3 big things that we can do depending on where you're struggling, right? If your issue is pornography, there are blocks. You block it out on your computer. You find ways to block it on your phone. A lot of times you have to find somebody to help you keep accountable with that. If it's a relationship piece and you're actually struggling to keep pure, or maybe you've already taken, gone that next step, it's time to find boundaries. Where can you, okay, we're not going to go to each other's houses when parents aren't home. Okay, we're only going to stay out this late because after that's where things start getting a little farther. Whatever it is, find your boundaries. If it's the lustful thoughts, what are you doing to try to get out of those thoughts? Are you taking time and saying, God, please clear my head? Are you like, okay, if I can drown this out with some music? What are you doing? And it's being able to do something to get it out of there, and to replace it then with God, whether that is taking time to read the Bible and to avoid these things, whether that's taking time in prayer and saying, God, please save me from my lust, deliver me from my temptation, right? And so that's how we just deconstruct the God of sex. And the last one is the one that's a little bit interesting, because a lot of you, I feel like this is the one that people will fight on the most. There's the God of entertainment, right? So entertainment is good. TV shows, movies, video games, sports, whatever entertains you, it's good until it's not. Until you allow it to take over your life, until you're doing things like devoting entire days hours, whatever it is, to these things. You know, for a lot of, especially, okay, middle school guys, how many of you guys play video games? I know pretty much all of you. Okay, how many of you would say you play 1 to 3 hours after school every day? Probably most of you, right? Like, I'm not dumb. I work at GameStop. I play video games. You play for 1 to 3 hours minimum. Fortnite, probably, whatever. The point is, you play these video games. Okay, how many of you are saying I'm setting and how many of you are setting aside then 1 to 3 hours to be in devotions, prayer, worship, and things of that nature with God? Yeah, I know I'm in a room by myself, but I still think I wouldn't see many, if any, hands go up right now. Right? We worship entertainment. You have to be in front of the TV Sunday by 2 o'clock so you can watch football. So if the pastor goes long, you're leaving before the pastor even finishes, right? We worship entertainment. Why? Because it distracts us from reality, right? Reality can suck sometimes. Let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about this dang pandemic. Let's talk about the racism that is all over the media right now with the police brutality and protests and all that stuff, right? Reality kind of sucks. So we want a distraction, and we allow entertainment to distract us. Instead of taking it to God and saying, God, please give me peace in the midst of all of this, and allow Him to sustain us, and allow Him to bring us joy and to bring us whatever it is to keep our minds from going to crazy places with everything going on. Instead, we turn to entertainment. And so we worship it. We build shrines to it. We commit time, money, and energy into it, right? We said we block off these times for TV, but how many of us, again, are doing this for devotional time, for time in prayer, for time of worship with God? Because I'd be willing to bet it's not very many. Even I, as a grown adult, I struggle sometimes to devote time to God. But you better believe me when I say that when I want to, every single Monday, I play video games with my brother, and I have that time set aside that we get online together. Like, where's my priorities? You know, where are your priorities? And so one of the things I want you to walk away with, we're talking about the temple of pleasure. We talked about food and sex. We talked about entertainment. When we walk out of this, I want to make sure you guys understand God created us to enjoy life. He is the one that made it so these things are pleasurable. And through Him is how we can actually really have really have pleasure in any of these things, right? And so in 1 Timothy 6, verse 17, it says this. It says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. God provides everything for us to enjoy. We need food, and yet He made things that taste so wonderful. We need to be able to reproduce so we can continue population, and yet He made sex, instead of something mechanic and just automatic, He made it something pleasurable, something that is desirable, right? With entertainment, He could have just made it so we needed an insane amount of sleep and never had to be entertained. But instead, He gave us creative minds and made, people make up stories and games and these video games, TV shows, and all this different stuff, right? He did that on purpose because He knew that that's something that we would enjoy, that we would find pleasure in. But He made it so it's meant to only be something that gives us true pleasure when we do it in light of God created it for that. And we see that with Solomon, right? We know of King Solomon, right? He's David's son through Bathsheba. He's the one that he's the last king while Israel is still one united nation. If you've been going along with us with our devos, you've probably seen that. But the big thing is this, right? He does this big search, and in Ecclesiastes 1:2, here's the search results, right? It's as if this is the first result when he Googled, what can give me pleasure without God? Meaningless. Meaningless. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Wow, that's depressing. He's like, whoa, this stuff sucks. Why is he like that? Because he tried to enjoy anything and everything without God to prove that God is what brings joy. He's the wisest man, probably the wisest man on the earth, if not the wisest man that has ever lived. And that because he had asked God for wisdom. And so he decided to use that wisdom to say, God, can I find something that will give me pleasure other than you? And the answer was no. Everything is meaningless. Utterly meaningless without God. Because God is what makes things that bring pleasure pleasurable. It's because God is the one that can sustain the pleasure from it. Instead of allowing food where we go, oh my gosh, I ate so much, I feel so fat, and you feel terrible about yourself. Where you're looking at porn or having sex early, or thinking these lustful thoughts, and we miss out on the intimacy and we feel empty inside. Or it's the entertainment, and if for whatever reason your sports get canceled because of COVID, or because the TV show has to be put on pause, we feel like we're missing part of ourselves. But if God is what's sustaining us, we go, all right, I guess I'll find something else to entertain me. All right, I can wait until marriage for sex. All right, this food is really good, but I don't need seconds. I'm pretty full. Right? We can set limits. We can set boundaries on everything. So guys, next week we're going to go through another temple. It's going to be the temple of power. We're going to be out encountering a few more gods and saying, all right, here's how they're a god, but here's how we can no longer treat them that way. So guys, I hope you are loved. I hope you are, I hope you're loved. You are loved. You are missed, and you are prayed for constantly. And just know that as we're starting now, we are beginning face-to-face gatherings. Check out our Facebook page for when those are happening. We'll be every week re-announcing what those dates and times are. And then on top of all that, these videos will still keep coming out weekly, at least through the month of June, just to make sure that you guys, as we're gathering together face-to-face, we're having time of fellowship and just enjoying being around each other, playing some games. And the teaching part will still be an online component, just to make it so that full time can be about having fun. So with that in mind, we'll see you here next Friday.